She left. Then she came back. And the tragedy is not that she returned. It is that he was not ready for what her return actually meant. He had spent weeks, sometimes months, doing the hardest work a man can do. The quiet, unglamorous work of reconstructing a life that had organized itself around her. He returned to things he had deprioritized. He rebuilt his daily rhythm without her in the center of it. He felt, slowly and imperfectly, the edges of a self that had been eclipsed by the relationship. He was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely becoming someone again. Then the message arrived. Casual in its phrasing, impossible in its weight. A small reach across the silence she had built with her departure. And everything he had carefully assembled shifted on its foundation, because hope, when a man has been in genuine grief, does not arrive slowly. It arrives like a tide. He asked the wrong question. Most men do. They ask, does she still love me? Does she want to come back? Is this real? These questions are human. They are also almost entirely beside the point. Because the question that actually decodes what is happening, the question that gives a man his power back in this moment, is, what changed in how she sees me between the moment she left and the moment she reached back? Because she did not return because she remembered how good he was. She returned because something shifted in how he registered to her. Something altered in the perception that had made leaving feel like the correct decision. She left because of who she thought he was. She came back because of who he became when she was gone. This video names that mechanism with precision. And understanding it is the only thing that can protect a man from misreading the most emotionally loaded message he will ever receive. You have been in this position, or you have watched someone close to you navigate it. Either way, the pattern is specific enough to recognize from the inside. She left with what felt like conviction. Not in anger. Sometimes the most final departures arrive most quietly. She simply withdrew. And in the aftermath, he moved through the stages that men who loved genuinely move through. The initial disbelief, the bargaining he conducted mostly with himself, the period of reduced functioning, and then the slow, determined work of reconstruction. He had started to believe it was over. Not because he had stopped caring, because the evidence had become hard to argue with. She was gone. He was building something new from what remained. Then she reached back. And the months of careful reconstruction became suddenly irrelevant, because the moment her name appeared on his screen, he was back at the beginning emotionally, transported with a speed that no rational process could account for to the exact state he had spent all that time trying to leave behind. He felt hope. He felt the particular, dangerous warmth of possibility being extended by someone whose departure had cost him significantly. And underneath the warmth, barely audible but present, the urgent question of what to do with it. The pattern drains men in a specific way that is different from any other kind of loss. Because the hope of a return is more disorienting than the grief of a departure. Grief has a trajectory. It moves. It diminishes over time, imperfectly but reliably. Hope activated at the wrong moment stops all of that movement. It freezes a man in the emotional position he was trying to exit. A man reads her message 4 times in 2 minutes. He is trying to determine from the language what it means, whether it is an overture or just a check-in, whether it carries intent or is simply filling a quiet moment of her regret. He is looking for certainty in the words when the real information is in the timing, and the timing is everything. Understanding what the timing actually communicates, what changed in her between leaving and reaching back, is the mechanism this video was built to explain. The mechanism behind her return is not romantic. It is almost brutally functional. And naming it clearly is the only thing that gives a man a genuine choice about what to do with it. Call it value recalibration under absence. Human beings do not accurately assess the value of something while they have guaranteed access to it. Access suppresses perceived value. Scarcity amplifies it. This is not a relationship principle. It is a foundational feature of how human cognition assigns worth. When she was with him, when his attention, his warmth, his presence were constant and reliable, her nervous system adapted to them the way it adapts to any reliably available resource. She stopped registering their weight. Not because she didn't value him, but because guaranteed availability reduces the conscious perception of value automatically. She felt something. She no longer felt it as acutely as she had when it was uncertain. After leaving, two things happened simultaneously. His guaranteed presence disappeared, triggering the neurological recalculation that absence always initiates. And he, in the process of genuinely rebuilding himself, began transmitting a different kind of signal. Not a calculated one. An authentic one. The signal of a man who was no longer organized around her return. That second element is the one most men miss entirely. They understand that absence increases perceived value. They do not understand that their own behavioral transformation during her absence is what made her feel the increase. Contrast this clearly. Two men are left by the same woman. The first man's absence is the absence of someone desperately hoping for return, and that desperation, however silent, transmits. She can feel it in the social media activity, in the mutual friends, in the low-frequency signal of someone whose world is still organized around whether she comes back. The second man's absence is the absence of someone who is genuinely elsewhere, genuinely occupied, genuinely becoming something that does not require her observation. She thinks about the second man in a qualitatively different way. Picture her at 11 p.m. 3 months after leaving, looking at something he posted, not designed to impress her, just evidence of a life actually being lived. Something in her shifts. The man she left is not the man she is looking at. She didn't fall back for who he was. She reached back for who he became when she was no longer there to watch. What this looks like in the precise texture of real post-departure dynamics is the section that makes this viscerally recognizable. The return rarely announces itself dramatically. It arrives in a form calibrated to give her deniability if he responds with too much warmth, something that can be received as casual if needed, but that carries unmistakable emotional charge if he is paying attention. A comment on something he posted. A question about something mutual that she could easily have directed elsewhere. A message that begins with something small, "Hey, how are you?" and carries in its smallness the weight of everything that went before it. She is reaching. She is not announcing the reach. He feels the charge immediately. He knows, men always know, that this is not ordinary contact. The timing, the phrasing, the fact that she initiated after the silence she established, all of it communicates something specific. Something happened in her perception of him between when she left and now. He will probably respond too warmly. This is the most common error. The warmth will signal that the reconstruction she witnessed, the version of him that triggered her recalibration, was a temporary state, not a structural one. That underneath the rebuilt man is the same man who needed her, whose equilibrium depended on her presence, whose world was organized around her as its center. And the moment she receives that signal, the recalibration begins to reverse. She had come back toward a man she no longer fully had. The moment he demonstrated that she still fully had him, the pull diminished. She didn't come back for the man who needed her. She reached back toward the man who didn't. And if he reveals the needing too quickly, he destroys the thing that made her reach. The reframe that reorganizes the entire picture. Her return is not a verdict on the relationship. It is a verdict on his recent behavior. She is responding to evidence of a man who had moved into a new position, and her reaching is the instinctive pull toward something that is now, unexpectedly, in the scarce category. What he does with that information, in the first response, in the first week, in the first conversation, determines whether what she felt was an accurate read of a genuinely changed man or a temporary perception that his familiar behavior will quickly correct. What the deeper truth of this dynamic reveals about desire, about power, about the specific way absence changes the architecture of a woman's regard, is the section that lands hardest. Here is the truth that most men in this situation never reach, and not reaching it is what costs them the most. Her return is information, but it is information about her perception of him, not about the relationship's viability, not about her readiness for what he originally wanted, not about whether the reasons she left have changed. She is responding to what he became in her absence. She is not necessarily ready to offer what his absence demonstrated he no longer required from her. This is the distinction that separates men who handle this dynamic with clarity from men who are destroyed by it a second time. The man who correctly reads her return understands. She has responded to the version of him that existed without her. She has not necessarily committed to any version of what comes next. Her reaching was genuine, but genuine reaching toward what she currently perceives, not guaranteed investment in what she is returning to. Here is the line that will generate real debate. A woman who returns after leaving does not come back because she changed. She comes back because you did, and the question you must answer clearly is whether you actually changed, or whether you simply had the appearance of changing while she was watching. That distinction is everything. The man who genuinely rebuilt, whose interior actually shifted, whose sense of worth is no longer housed in her proximity, can receive her return from a stable position. He can engage with it honestly, without urgency, without the desperate recalibration that signals to her nervous system that the change was not structural. The man who was performing the appearance of rebuilding, who maintained the composure publicly but was privately organized around whether she would come back, will reveal himself in the first unguarded moment. And when she feels the familiar shape of his need through the unfamiliar presentation of his composure, the pull she felt dissolves. Picture a man receiving her message. He waits a measured amount of time before responding. His response is warm but contained. He suggests something specific, a meeting, a conversation without urgency. He does not pour the months of carefully managed distance into a single message. She feels, in his response, the same quality that made her reach back. A man who is still somewhere else, still occupied, still not entirely available for the emotional absorption she left. The reaching does not tell you she is ready. It tells you she is noticing. What you do with the noticing determines whether she actually returns, or simply noticed and moved on. The shift is not about what to do with her return. It is about who you are when it arrives. A man who has genuinely rebuilt, who has used her departure as the occasion for returning to himself rather than performing the appearance of it, occupies a fundamentally different position when the message arrives. He is not waiting to be chosen again. He has been living. The choice of what to do with her reach comes from a full position, not from a depleted one. That fullness changes the entire character of his response. He is not urgent. He is not strategically cool. He is genuinely unhurried, because his day was already occupied before her name appeared on his screen. He is warm because he is a warm person, not because her warmth is the thing that regulates his composure. He is willing to engage, but not at the cost of the life he has rebuilt. The man she reached back toward was not trying to be reached. That is precisely why she reached. Contrast the man who responds from emotional scarcity, whose reply arrives in minutes, whose warmth is slightly too concentrated, whose immediate repositioning around the possibility of her return is visible in the energy of what he writes, with the man who responds from his actual life, which is already in progress. The second man's response does not confirm what she feared she had lost. It confirms what made her reach in the first place. That there is still someone there she cannot fully possess. If this is reaching you in a specific way, if you are currently holding a message from someone you spent real time moving on from, or if you have been in the position of not knowing how to receive a reach that arrived after you thought the silence was permanent, stay with that. Because what follows is the warning that determines everything about what comes next. The warning is direct. The most common response to her return is the one most likely to destroy what her return represents. Most men, upon receiving contact from a woman who left, respond from hope, not from clarity. The hope activates all the behaviors that preceded her departure. The overinvestment, the urgent warmth, the visible reorganization of the man's attention and energy around the possibility of reconnection. He becomes, in the course of a single conversation, the version of himself that she left. And she feels it. The shift from the man she was reaching toward, the one who was occupied, settled, evidently no longer organized around her, to the familiar version, the one whose emotional gravity still points in her direction. The recalibration she had experienced begins to reverse. The scarcity that generated her pull becomes, suddenly, availability again. And availability in this dynamic has never produced attraction. The fastest way to lose her again is to respond to her return as if you have been waiting for it. Picture a man who received her message and, in the relief and hope of the moment, showed her his full hand within 48 hours. The plans he had been waiting to make with her. The conversations he had rehearsed. The warmth that had nowhere to go for 3 months and arrived all at once in a form that was too much, too soon, too clearly organized around her as its destination. She pulled back within a week. He did not understand why. The reach had been real. His response was too much evidence that the change she had observed was not structural, that underneath the composed, occupied man who had existed in her absence was the same familiar need she had not been able to sustain before. What becomes possible when a man responds from his actual rebuilt self, warmly, without urgency, from genuine rather than performed stability, is a second chapter that neither of them could have written from the position of their first ending. This is the full picture, assembled without softening. She didn't come back because she missed what the relationship was. She came back because something about what he had become in her absence generated a pull she had not anticipated. The man she left and the man she was reaching toward were, in her perception, genuinely different. Whether they were actually different, whether the change was structural or performed, genuine or temporary, is the question her return was designed, consciously or not, to answer. And the answer she receives in his first response will determine everything. The man who has genuinely rebuilt does not need to manage this moment. He does not need to calculate the right waiting period or craft the optimal response. He simply responds from who he actually is now, which, if the rebuilding was real, is a man who has somewhere to be and someone to be, and who can receive her reach with genuine warmth and genuine steadiness because both of those things are now authentically his. She left a man who needed her. She came back toward a man who didn't. The only question is whether he stays the second one, or becomes the first one again the moment she extends the warmth he spent months learning to live without. If this channel has been delivering the psychological precision that actually changes how you navigate these dynamics, not just what to do, but why the thing you did produced what it produced, subscribe. More of this is coming. If you know a man currently holding a message from someone he worked very hard to move past, someone who reached back and disrupted the reconstruction he had built, share this with him. He needs the mechanism named more than he needs advice about whether to respond. Leave a comment with this. When she came back, what did you do? And do you understand now what it communicated to her about whether you had actually changed? Because that answer, held honestly without retrospective editing, is the most useful thing you can carry into the next time this arrives. She came back because you stopped needing her to. The only way to keep her there is to stay that man, not as strategy but as who you actually became.